everybody. Thank you for coming in today. Welcome to the session. My name is Cammie. I'm going to be the room moderator. I just wanted to introduce our speaker for this session. So this is Dr. Leah Hoffman. She's going to be presenting today on insights from inside an adolescent addiction treatment home. And as a licensed master addiction counselor and clinical director at Eckards Youth Homes, I think she has a lot of grounds to stand on as she speaks on this topic. So I'm very excited to introduce her today. So come on up.
Thank you. Thanks, Cammie. I would like us to brainstorm for an icebreaker activity that I have in mind. And before I tell you the topic of this, I'm going to give you some discussion questions to think of to yourself. And I want you to look around the room and consider a stranger that you may partner with for this discussion. And the questions you're going to be answering are, where were you? Who are you with? And what day and time was it? What would you do if I told you the discussion topic was your last sexual encounter? Before you hightail it out of here to go to another session, we're not going to do that. But I want you to remember what that pit in your stomach just felt like, what that absolute panic, I would imagine, just rushed over you, and probably that severe anger you just had towards me for even suggesting that you talk about something so intimate and personal with a stranger. Okay. My administrator is looking at me like I am full of surprises, but I think we have been full of nothing but surprises since we opened 4 years ago. And maybe that biggest surprise was the idea to take traumatized teenagers from across the state of North Dakota, take away their drugs, and invite them to come live with us. I think, we all knew that it was going to be hard. I don't know that we totally knew exactly what we were getting into. But now that we're 4 years in, I think it is time that we could start talking about it and sharing a bit about these kids. Glad none of you ran out. Thank you for staying. I'm from Williston, born and raised. I left for college and moved back and married my farmer. And we have 3 boys, 10, 7, and 2. And most of my time outside of work is shuffling kids from this sports practice to this sports practice to the next one. I'm sure we can relate. And we also live the farm lifestyle. Most of the year, it's really important for us to expose our kids to that farm life. And there's a thing about the farm where my husband's family has a beautiful farmhouse there. And in their front room, there's always the table covered in magazines, newspaper clippings. If you're ever in the paper, his aunt's the first one to cut it out and give it to you. She's so sweet. There's always toys on the floor and food, any meal you could want. Really encouraging you to just come in, sit down, take a load off, and talk to each other. And there was a moment last summer that really stuck with me, and I think about it a lot. And it was so brief, but it's left me with questions that I still don't really know the answers to, so I'm going to share it with you. The topic of the conversation that day, and again, it was so brief, was a newspaper article that was on the top of the pile, and it had a young man's mugshot. And that news story was about his recent arrest and his recent charges, some pretty serious charges following an incident that he had gotten himself into that was substance related, or substances were involved, and he hurt some people. And so his charges were pretty significant. And I remember in just the maybe 30 seconds that it was the topic of conversation, the vibe was definitely disgust, anger, and shame. But what the people in the room didn't know is that that child came to us the first time when he was 16. His mom had just went to prison, and he had been trying to live with mom's boyfriend, but that wasn't working out. And it was estimated that by the time he got to us, he had been couch surfing for about 3 months. And I think we can all picture a dog backed into a corner, right? Wanting to fight their way out. And that was this boy. He did not trust that any adult was capable of taking care of him. He didn't trust any sort of authority figure. And he really struggled. He really struggled. And one thing, at Eckert that we could take pride in is he was well cared for while he was with us, but we can't keep these kids forever, right? And the question that I have is, treatment can be incredibly difficult and recovery can be incredibly difficult, even in the best case circumstances, right? Let alone when you don't have a stable household, when you don't have someone to give you rides, you don't know when you're going to eat your next meal. And so this thing that I keep thinking about is, when does the sadness and empathy towards a neglected youth change to disgust and anger? Is it when they turn 18 and now they're an adult? Is it when their behaviors negatively impact somebody else? I don't know. Hope you don't want me to answer that, because that's my burning question. So I want you to keep this boy in mind when we're talking today. And I'll have more stories too, not all of them so sad, but that's the reality of who we're working with. I've got some pictures of our home here, so let's switch gears a little bit. I don't have a lot of words on my slides, I just kind of want to show you what it looks like at our houses. So I'll spend just a little bit of time talking about our treatment program. We are located in Williston, and we go by Eckert Youth Homes, and we take kids ages 13 to 17 in to live with us. We can take youth referrals from anybody. Our application is on our website, and we can admit youth even if they don't have the ability to pay for treatment. There's programs called the Substance Use Disorder Voucher that can add supplemental funding in order for kids to be able to come to us, because we don't want money to be a barrier. Both genders, we have a boys' home and a girls' home, and between the two homes we have 10 beds that we operate. And so that's helpful to us because obviously they're not coming in 5 boys, 5 girls, right? We can get a little bit lopsided because we actually have 16 beds. Our goal someday is to increase our occupancy, but staffing is always a challenge. And I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but having 10 teenagers in one house is a lot, because at the end of the day, they're still teenagers. In order to meet criteria for our program, like I said, there's that age range. We could have a youth 17 when they come to us, and it's not unusual for them to turn 18 while they're with us, and they could still stay. We just can't admit youth after they've already turned 18. So we have also been questioned about taking youth as young as 12, and we haven't quite gone there yet. We are licensed by the state of North Dakota Behavioral Health Division, and according to them, there is no lower age definition for what an adolescent is, and so we are considering age 12 as well. Their treatment-heavy time is really that Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 time frame, and that's when they're in a lot of their group therapy, they have family sessions, they do individual sessions working on their treatment plans. We devote time to their schoolwork, and so whatever school they are currently engaged in, we try to help them maintain that. A lot of our youth aren't in school, so we're working on getting them plugged back into school. Some are working on their GED, some already have their GED, so it's just kind of a wide range of individualized approach for what their education looks like. And I know the treatment program really is something that a lot of people end up being curious about, so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time on it now, but at the end we'll have plenty of time for questions too if anyone has specific questions, and I have a lot of material over here too. I mentioned that we are licensed by the state. We have to be licensed for our treatment program, of course, but we also did a little extra work, a little bit of extra work to receive our accreditation. So we actually have a national accreditation for our program that we are super proud of, and part of that accreditation process is quality improvement. And some of it's dry, like obviously we're looking at incident reports and number of admits and things like that, but one of the things that is my favorite part about our quality improvement process is our youth surveys. So we send out surveys, or our kids do their surveys before they leave us, and they have about 50 questions on their list. And what I did here is I took my favorite question we asked them, and it says, how would you describe Eckert to somebody who's never been there? And I took all of their narrative answers and I put it into a software to spit out the 50 most commonly used words answering that question. And that's what you see here. The bigger the word, the more often it showed up. So obviously we are a good place, according to them. And one thing that really made me laugh on the right side there, if you see very small, at least a couple kids must have said it was boring. And I'm okay with boring. They gotta learn how to entertain themselves. And so, a lot of kids have filled this out, because if we talk numbers, we have had, since we've opened, we have had 200 different kids come through our program in 4 years. And that's 200 different kids. But within those 200, 48 of them have come more than one time. So if you do the quick math, a fourth of the kids that have been to us come back more than once. Some, a lot of them, twice. 3 times is not unusual. We've had some come as many as 4 and 5 times. And their average length of stay with us, I don't know if I mentioned this, is typically 4 to 6 weeks. We have had some youth leave after 3 weeks, and we've had some youth stay as long as 3 months. So our program is very individualized. And when a kid comes back to us, we're not necessarily viewing it as something went wrong, because that's the nature of the disease. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the disease model of substance use, but if you're interested, I would definitely encourage to look at relapse and harm reduction. Those are 2 things that are important to understand. And some of these kids that come back, we tend to get pretty attached to them. I mean, obviously we have a soft spot for every one of them that comes through, but when I was thinking about what it's like when kids return, one boy came to mind, and there was a day that I was on the basketball court. I found myself out there playing horse with the boys. You never know what you're going to do there on any day. And for some reason, I could not miss. I was making every basket I threw up. 3-pointers. I made like a half-court shot, and they were so shocked. Free throws, layups, all the things. And I beat all of them. Yeah. But what I didn't tell them was that in 2006, I had the highest field goal percentage of high school girl basketball players in the state. And so when we were walking off the court, I said, man, I did really good for my first time. And I wish I could have taken that to the grave because it was funny. I don't even know where I came up with that. But this one boy, he about fell over. He's like, "That was your first time playing basketball?" And I was like, "No, buddy. Like, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry, I just lied to you." But I bring that up because he left us. You know, he went home, and sure enough, a couple weeks later, this boy comes in. "I heard I need to play basketball against you." And that really shows us. I mean, I got a big head over that for sure. I have a reputation now. It's very stressful, but
You need counseling.
yeah, pressure. But that tells me North Dakota is not that big. And when we're talking about groups of friends who run together in these similar circumstances, they know each other, and they're talking about Eckert outside of here, outside of Eckert. And that's just a funny example of how we know they're talking about it. But there's many that we get told. I hope they are sharing what they're actually genuinely writing in their exit surveys. So we have to laugh while we're there. I mean, the stuff that we're working with, obviously I almost got tearful at the start talking about our boy, but it's hard, serious work, and so we have to laugh when we can. And I think we learned that like very early. I would think it was within the first 2 weeks. Have you ever seen a rule and you know that it's a rule because somebody did it? And it's a very weird rule. We have those. And within the first 2 weeks, we had 2 rules involving the roof. I was in my office and I get someone screaming like, "So-and-so's on the roof." And I'm like, okay, so I go out there and sure enough, a very able-bodied teenage boy just put himself up on the roof, which what happened was a buddy threw his sandals up there. And he's like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to make someone, I'll just climb up there and get it. I can get it." Which at the front of the building, we're about 9 feet, maybe. We're on a slope, so the back of the building, you are at least 25 feet in the air. And I'm like, "Please just get down. Like, let's not get hurt." So we have a rule, no going on the roof. And not but 2 days later, I'm in one home looking down at the other home on the slope, and I see dead center on the roof a kitchen garbage bag full of garbage. And the kids, they have chores and they have tasks that they have to do. And I'm like, well, this is peculiar. So how did this garbage bag end up dead center on the roof? And they're big buildings. Sure enough, the girl whose duty it was to take it to the dumpster, walked out the front door and just helicopter threw it all the way back dead center onto the roof. So we also cannot throw shoes or garbage bags on the roof. And I actually had a split second where I was like, well, I could go ask that boy to just like hop up there and get it down, which obviously I didn't do. But so I wanted to make sure I share some of this with you guys so that you know that it's not all doom and gloom there, and we do have a lot of fun. But to really try to get across to people what it's like working with these youth who aren't in it day to day, you know, I do think sometimes we get a little desensitized to it. I asked our team, I said, you know, I'm going to be meeting with a group of people and talking about the program. Like, do any of the kids that we've had come to mind when we talk about trauma? And every staff member that I asked said this same girl. And her story, you could feel the anger radiating off of her, and you could feel the pain. And she was with us during a time when it's not unusual for our youth to be going through court proceedings as victims in something, and hers was pretty significant. Thank God she was with us, because during that of her perpetrators being charged out, she ended up learning a lot more details about the assault where she was the victim that she did not know. And all the way down to who participated in it, which she wasn't aware of. And she was bursting out of her own skin. And she wanted answers to when she'd be able to leave. She was a very high flight risk. Many agencies across the state knew her story and knew who she was. And anytime she was found, we all take a big sigh of relief because we know she's safe again. But she would be found states away, just trying to get away from herself. And when I say states away, very high risk for trafficking, just trying to cope. And there was one day where she, like I said, bursting out of her own skin, couldn't really stand herself, and she wanted answers on when she was going to be able to leave. We were in struggles with CPS trying to get answers for her, and she busted through 2 locked doors to get to our program director's office. And I'm only smiling when I say this because our program director is an absolute saint. Her name is Carrie, and she is the most patient person you're ever going to meet. And so this girl, I picture a donkey kick. I didn't actually see it, but the frame of the door was broken to get through the first door. And then she gets to the next door, busts through it, and there's Carrie in the meeting doing her things. She just slides her stuff to the side, says, "Come sit down, what do you need? What can I help you with? What can we try to figure out?" And it was not the time to talk to her about boundaries or damaged property, right? Or where she was supposed to be and who she was supposed to be with, what's on the schedule. And she has a very special place, I think, for all of us, of where it's so important to do our trauma-informed care with these kids. And a little more mild example of trauma-informed care, but still so, is it's not unusual for the kids to come to us and be experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms. And so, like, we're not talking about kids that are, like, stealing beer out of their dad's fridge or experimenting with weed. Like, these are kids who are using fentanyl. They're using IV methamphetamine. They're using pills. A ton of self-medicating trauma. None of them, I would say, maybe not none, most of them aren't having fun anymore. They're just using to feel better, to avoid their withdrawal symptoms. So when we take youth in, if they are going through withdrawals, we do full assessments. Obviously, we have a nurse for these things, and they get put on withdrawal monitoring protocol. And part of that protocol is we have to check their vitals and check them physically, how they're doing about every 2 to 4 hours. And that can be when they're sleeping. And if they are that uncomfortable, they finally fall asleep, and then we come in to wake them up. And I'm talking like shaking, sweaty, puking, pooping, body aches, all of the things. If you've ever seen it in a movie, that's really what it looks like. Crying. And this girl did not want her vitals taken. And she was mad, and she understandably was yelling, turn off the effing lights, like, don't touch me, I just felt like just livid. And our employee really did her best to get done her job that she needed to get done to make sure that this youth was safe, and left her room. And the next morning, that youth woke up to a fresh cup of hot chocolate on her nightstand. It seems so small, but what that taught that girl, and she told us this, I probably would have never even known this story if she hadn't told me, was that she had never seen any sort of conflict resolution in her past. She didn't know that she could have a genuine reaction to something when she wasn't feeling well and not be shamed for it. When actually, in return, she got empathy. So that cup of hot chocolate that she woke up to was an absolute tool in relationship building with this youth, to know that, like, we see you, we hear you, that must suck, and you probably feel really bad right now. And good on our staff, too, for recognizing not to take it personal. You know, we go through a lot of training with our staff to make sure, because this is hard work. Nobody wants to go to work and get yelled at, right? And so that did a lot for that youth, just the whole concept of restoration and still being welcome after a mistake like that. And she told us that. So what is trauma? I'm going to read you a little bit. So trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and well-being. That's probably not a surprise to us, right? Most of us can kind of grasp that definition of trauma. It's when something bad happens and you can't stop thinking about it, or it's really affected you. But strong and prolonged activation of the body's stress management systems in the absence of protective adult buffering can actually physically disrupt the way the brain is developing, and it can lead to stress management difficulties throughout the rest of your life. We call this at Eckert, when we teach this to the kiddos, we call this term your distress tolerance threshold. So let's say I'm a normal person with no trauma, nothing really impacting me today. My distress tolerance window, or my threshold, might be 0 to 100. Like, I could stub my toe and have an annoying work meeting and get yelled at by somebody, and maybe I get to like a 40 or a 50, you know. It can add up, you can get up there. But most of these kiddos who have had trauma are consistently riding at like a 95. Their distress tolerance window is so small after this repeated and repeated exposure that it does not take much for them to tip over. We really focus on asking the kiddos, instead of saying, "What's wrong with you?" we're asking, "What's happened to you?" And I have up here some of the key considerations for addressing trauma, and these are all things that we do at Eckert. I won't go through each of them individually, but I know you've heard me talk about so far that relationship building and forming connections is incredibly important. And we do a lot of teaching for the kids. So giving them information. We teach exactly what I'm going with you right here now is stuff we teach our kids. And then it's the same as information throughout the day. Like, could you imagine if you came here today and you didn't know who was speaking, when, or where to go, or when the lunch break was, or what we were having for dinner, right? We all like information. And a lot of times these kids, if you think of our girl who broke through the 2 doors, she just wanted to know where she was going next. Huge questions, right? Kids just need a little bit of information. And so let's look at what some of these stress responses may look like at face value, and also consider what some of the underlying factors might be. We've probably all heard of fight, flight, or freeze, right? And fawn has entered the conversation recently, and you can kind of see the differences there. But when one of these is activated, and we do this without really thinking about it, right? It's instant. The goal of these responses is typically 2 things: protection from pain and self-preservation. So when we see a youth having an anger outburst or obsessively asking questions. Or maybe they're just completely in fawn and they're just completely deflecting. They don't want to talk about themselves at all, right? Our first boy, he wasn't going to give us the light of day. And his threshold was in the negatives. So there's a lot to go over here, but what I hope you take from this so far is that when people have a lower window of tolerance, oftentimes the behavior that they are displaying is their best attempt they can do at the time to meet one of their needs. And that is a shift in thinking, to think like they're doing their best right now with what they have in the tank. That's a good way to think about it. So I'd like to spend some time talking about a theory, counseling theory. It's called choice theory. And what choice theory says is that all of our behavior is purposeful. Everything we do, like I said, is our best attempt to get what we want at that point in time with the information available to us. Getting what you want ultimately satisfies one or more of your 5 basic needs, which provides the motivation for everything that we do. So I have a quote here, North Dakota favorite, Teddy Roosevelt, I thought was quite fitting. Do what you can with what you have where you are. We've probably not thought about it in this context before, but you have most likely heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That should be a familiar thing from any psychology class you've ever taken. One thing, that one is in the triangle, and then the basic needs of choice theory are listed right here, and we're going to go into them in a little bit more detail. Where Maslow's has them in a hierarchy, choice theory says these are not in a hierarchy. You don't necessarily need one before you get the other. And you might be looking at that, well, how do you meet your other needs if you're not alive, right? Because obviously survival is on there. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about survival, but I would challenge you to think that, do some people put other needs ahead of survival? Sometimes. You're not going to catch me skydiving, even though it looks fun. I'm not going to do that. Nor am I going to inject fentanyl. So that's another extreme example. But so what are the basic needs? We have survival, like I just mentioned, love and belonging, power, freedom, and fun. And that's what we're going to spend the last bit talking about, is those 4 needs. I know there's 5, obviously. To give a little context to this, choice theory says that all of us are born with these innate needs, and we all have them. We all have a need for each of them at varying levels. And that is what helps shape our personalities. That's what makes us tick. And so picture somebody, a CEO who works 80 hours a week and loves it. He may have a high need for power, low need for love and belonging, right? If he has a high need for love and belonging, he might hate his job, right? Because he's there too much. Think of a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids. She may have a high need for love and belonging and a low need for freedom, right? Just for an example of what this can look like. So like I said, let's touch on survival. Survival is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, we all have a core need for safety and security and sustaining life. But I did say a moment ago that some people would risk their survival for another need. I mean, we had our kiddo who was very high-risk behaviors being found states away. Was she meeting her love and belonging need? Was she meeting her power need in that way, knowing that her survival was at risk? It could be argued. We have a lot of kids that come to us with food insecurities. Very memorable moment for me was watching this boy open our industrial-sized refrigerators and cry because he had never seen so much food. And a lot of the kids that come to us have never had their own bedroom. let alone their own bed. Sometimes they're bed sharing, sometimes they're sleeping on couches, or sometimes they don't know where they're going to sleep, right? And that's a key function of residential treatment, because how are you going to worry about stopping using or studying for a test when you don't know when you're going to eat and sleep again, right? So we have to pay attention to survival. But for y'all today, I want to spend a little bit more time on the next 4. And while we're going through this, I typically save this little kicker for the end, but I want to tell you ahead of time so that we're talking about it, you can think about yourselves and think about these kids that I've mentioned, or any kids in your lives, really anybody. And you have to know that you have to know how you're going to meet these needs in a healthy way. Because if you don't meet it in a healthy way, you're going to meet it in an unhealthy way. You're going to have to meet it. You just have to decide which one it's going to be. And you may be going through this and being like, wow, I'm really low in this area. Like, I need to figure out, if you've been feeling in a funk or like something feels off or doesn't feel quite right, run yourself through these and see if you can find a gap anywhere. So let's talk about love and belonging. This is our inherent social drive for connection. They want to have satisfying relationships, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a romantic relationship. It can be with parents, siblings, teachers, a team, any sort of group, your local church. All of those things can help satisfy our need for love and belonging. Unfortunately, the way that we see this being met in an unhealthy way is a lot of times our kids may have gang affiliations. That's the only group they relate with and want to associate with. Really hard to leave their using friends when they're trying to not use, because that's their people. Even harder when it's their family. We've had kids who were gifted drugs for their birthdays from parents. Devastating, right? We've had kids who had their first birthday party ever with us. Their first birthday cakes, right? It's not unusual to have that need for love and belonging. And when we go through these, you'll notice that the love and belonging need is the only one that involves other people. The rest of these you could meet on your own with your own devices. But that need for connection is so important. So power is the need for power within, not necessarily power over. We don't have this like innate desire to control people. It could turn into that if you're not careful, but we're talking about power within. So this could be being satisfied with how your time and your energy are going. And that feeling you get when you study really hard and you get an A on a test. Or that feeling some people get when they run a marathon. I would have no idea, but I would imagine that would be a fulfilling victory to have, right? I have a toddler right now, and he's 2, and you can see this play out in real time, where it was, I put his shoes on, I put his coat on, I put his jammies on, I do all these things. He's like, no, I do it. I do it. He's exercising his autonomy over his things that he wants to be in control. He wants to have that feeling and that pride. So I think power, you could really consider interchanging out the word pride. But what are some unhealthy ways that we can meet this? Substance use. I've had kids say they feel 10 foot tall and bulletproof when they're drunk or when they're high. Or they have ADHD and their parents have taken all of their pills and sold them. So in order for me to not be annoying to everyone around me, I have to use to just make those voices calm down. It's happened. He actually said, I need to do it to feel normal, sit still, and not be told I'm annoying every day. Or social anxiety, right? Like if you are a socially anxious person and you're being challenged to go out into the real world sober every day, Like, in order to feel more in control, I need to take something to take the edge off. Other examples that have come from our kids in this would be like the dealing lifestyle in general. I mean, if these youth are getting their drugs, obviously they're getting it from someone. And that status of being a dealer, if you ever hear the word plug, that is the new term for a drug dealer, of who's your plug. So there's some control feeling that way, like I am important. Let's talk about freedom. Freedom is multifaceted. So we're talking about obviously physical freedom, the ability to move around and go and do what you want to do and be with who you want to be with. If you've ever had your physical freedom limited, you know what I'm talking about, like being stuck on a plane, not being able to stretch your legs. If anybody's claustrophobic or you feel like, okay, I don't know where the out is, like I can't have my back to the door, like some of you may be able to relate to that. It's also emotional freedom. So being able to feel a full range of emotions. If you're not able to do that, and I hope none of you know what that's like, but if you're not able to feel your feelings, like think of like a little boy and telling him not to cry. Or it's not that bad. Don't be sad. You're overreacting. Those types of statements. If people are trying to figure out who they are and being told that they can't be that way would be limiting your feeling of freedom. So some of the ways we combat this in our program is we don't have locks on our doors. Kids could leave at any time if they really wanted to. We do have kids that go on unintended walks sometimes. We might call it running away, but generally we can get them back. And most of the time they were feeling like that girl felt, where she couldn't stand herself in her own skin. She just needed to get out. I'm sure we can relate to that feeling. And they'll be outside on the patio equipment, taking a deep breath. We offer choices. And so if you've ever heard of the oppositional defiant diagnoses, where people really struggle being told what to do, or even hinted at or suggested something to do, offering choices helps. You're going to need to call your probation officer. Do you want to do it by yourself, or do you want me to do it with you? If you've ever been a parent, you know that trick too. Yeah. Do you want to take a bath before we read a book or after we read a book? Bath is not an option. But freedom essentially is the self-expression and the ability to pursue what you want to pursue. And I firmly believe that we don't necessarily know how important our freedom is to us until we've had it challenged in some way. So take that into consideration with yourself too, if you're doing some self-reflection on these. And then fun. Who knew that fun was a basic human need? Because it is. Fun should be self-explanatory. It's, again, really tying into that connection. But you can have fun on your own. You don't necessarily have to have other people. I want to tell you about an experiment. Have any of you ever heard about Rat Park? Yeah. So Rat Park was an experiment that was done by some research scientists where they initially had a rat, well, multiple rats, but picture one rat in one cage, a pretty small cage, and that rat had the option to self-dose from a water bottle that had water in it, or a water bottle that was laced with opiates. And they found when they had the rats in these conditions, they would self-dose on that opiate-laced water to the point where they were dying. In the second part of that experiment, they built Rat Park, which was a large enclosure, had multiple rats in it. They had tunnels, they had tubes, all sorts of stuff for them to play with and play with each other. And they still had the water bottles with the water and the water bottle with the laced opiates. And they found nearly all of the rats were drinking out of the plain water. Occasionally, one would go over and take a bump off the opiates. But none of them overdosed and died. It was more of a recreational high, you might say.
It's 3:45.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So people have fun in different ways, and people have different levels of need for fun, right? Me, compared to my husband, my fun need is like low. He is always going. Fun for one person could be out socializing. Again, you might play your introvert, extrovert into this. One person might have the time of their life being alone reading their book. But what does this mean for our kids? Some of the things that they find fun with their substance use, the socializing, maybe that's who they socialize with. I think what I'm told is that it is fun for a while. Not for very long. But to wrap up, how many of you heard of this quote before? If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. I tell the kids when we're teaching this choice theory to them, the worst thing you could have happen is you use and it works for you, right? If you have a problem and you feel like that substance use has solved it for you, you're in trouble. Because that tool is now in your toolbox forever. Anytime you feel like you have a dip in your love and belonging, or a dip in your freedom, or your dip in your fun, you're going to go into your toolbox of all of the different ways you've ever met those needs before, and that one's going to be there, which is very risky, extremely risky. So what do we do about that? We need to make sure we have other tools in our toolbox. So I want you to think about yourselves. Think about the kids around you. Think about your husbands, wives, your friends. And I would challenge you to teach them a little bit about choice theory and these basic needs, and maybe looking at problems they're experiencing through a little bit of a different lens. I would challenge you to go through each of your own needs and figure out, on a scale of 1 to 10 on a perfect day, where would I be? Like I said, my fun is a little bit lower, right? I might be at like a 7. But if I'm only getting a 2, I probably need to do something fun, right? Something I enjoy. I can speak to this. Like I have 3 boys, and I remember one day I was about to lose it, and I probably lose it once every fall when my husband's harvesting, and I've got all my kids, and it's just a lot. And I actually was like, why do I feel so bad right now? And I thought about it, and I said, I haven't been alone for 17 days. Like I haven't had any alone time for 17 days, minus driving somewhere, right, to work usually. And I was like, okay, I need to have a bit of a recharge. Yeah. But I'm a fortunate person. I've never had any substance use in my history. Things can creep up like that if you're not paying attention, because like I said, anything you've ever done that has met that need for you goes into your toolbox. So you've got to have other tools in there. And then the goal would be adaptability and flexibility, right? If you think of somebody who is physically fit, they probably have strength and flexibility in their muscles and in their body. We want that same thing for our mental health too. If we're going to be mentally fit, we're able to adapt to the things that are happening, and we can pivot and shift when we need to, and like, okay, I can't do this right now, but I can do this right now. And I think my takeaway of this, I kind of taught you 2 different things here. I taught you about our kids And then I taught you about choice theory, but it's recognizing that there is an entire group of people out there, hundreds of kids actually, who this is kind of small potatoes to them, right? They need support and help. If I could give you a tangible thing, I saw what category I was listed under of generational in the church. So I better tie it to that, is make sure, how do you get these groups, how do you get that population involved? I had an interview one time shortly after we opened about COVID, and so many questions were being asked about, how is COVID impacting the kids that are coming to you? Is COVID making things hard? And I was like, these kids don't know what COVID is. COVID is a blip on their radar. And I know that sounds extreme. I mean, obviously they might catch the news now and then, but I think they were shocked with my answer. I was like, they're not worried about COVID. They need help. And I take it back to that beginning where I mentioned at what point do we go from that sadness for that neglected child where we really want to intervene, right, to disgust for the adult. And I would challenge you all to think about how you can loop this very large group of people in, because they're there. Mm-hmm. We have only 9 minutes. If anyone has any questions or stuff you want to talk about, I know this is a lot. Oh, yeah.
So you talked a lot about the toolbox that students have, and that is one tool that they have. Do you guys make any effort to introduce new tools? What kind of things would you be introducing to meet those needs so that they have other options?
Oh, yeah, great question. So the question for here, right, was asking how we help them get more tools into their toolbox. And that truly is nearly the entire purpose of treatment, right? That's a big ask. And we do devotions every morning. We're a Christian-based program, and so finding ways to incorporate that. Every kid is completely unique. Figuring out how they're going to meet their physical needs when they leave us. I mean, we've had youth cut back on their eating when they are getting close to discharge because they want their stomachs to get used to not having as much food. So some of our tasks are the logistics. Let's make sure that you're not hurt, hungry, or lonely, right? That could be helping them get gym memberships, helping them get doctor's appointments, but that, I would say, those coping skills is the majority of what they're doing in their group time and in their individual sessions. And then also a really important piece of that is communicating to their people on the outside. So, hey, Mom, next time I tell you that I really want to go to the gym, I'm going to need you to bring me to the gym, and this is why. So that's a great question. It's a long answer. I would say that's the entire program. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, oh yeah.
Sorry. What percentage of your kids are judicially involved in, and what sorts of care do they find after leaving your program?
Okay, yeah. So who are we getting our referrals from, and what does their aftercare look like? So I would say probably, I'm gonna guesstimate a number, I would say at least 80% of them have some sort of probation officer or Department of Juvenile Services that's referring to us. And they have to agree to come. They can't just be placed there. So, and they have to meet criteria and all those things too. A lot of times the alternative is detention. So we look pretty good. So while they are they're choosing the lesser of the evils according to them. So when they are leaving us, we always have discharge planning meetings, and we start planning for their discharge as soon as they move in. And that can be having meetings with their probation officers. Everything's done over Zoom. Obviously, we get kids from all over the state. Meetings with their families. And the purpose of residential treatment is setting up their aftercare services. Some people think incorrectly that residential is the end, right? Like, oh, okay, you went to treatment, you're good now. Where I challenge that and say residential treatment is the start. Like, you get here, we get you off the substances, we get you stable, and now we've figured out where you're going next. And we have kiddos in aftercare services that are in it for years. And it's not unusual if we have a youth come when they're 14 and they go to their outpatient, they slip up, they struggle, they come back, slip up, struggle, come back, right? And those aftercare services across the state look different compared to what city you're in. Williston has outpatient treatment. Most of the major cities have some sort of outpatient aftercare, and typically that's at least 1 hour a week. Sometimes it can be more than that, all the way up to like 6 hours a week. Yeah.
Have you noticed that there's any significant similarities or factors in students who marked improvement compared to those who don't? Like, is there something you can tell that indicates that they're going to be more successful post-treatment?
There's a variety of things, yes. So the question was, are there any things that we can tell early on that are going to be an indicator if they're going to be successful or not? Generally, we call it their readiness to change. There's a lot of different assessments that we do in scoring and placing of people, but we talk about that readiness to change. And if you've ever heard that term before, you've heard that pre-contemplation is where they don't recognize it's a problem and they're not willing to change it. And then they progress through that of okay, I can see that this is a problem, but I'm not ready to do this yet. All the way to I see it's a problem, but I'm going to do this, but not that. And where they're at in their readiness to change, we try to meet them there. And so if we have a youth who's willing to stop using amphetamines but not willing to stop smoking weed, we're going to work on not using amphetamines because that's what they're ready to do. So I would say the main factors we take into consideration is that success, and then we've really had to challenge our idea of what success means. Because what is it? Is it not using at all? Is it I used to drink 5 times a week and now I drink 1? It's hard to put, quantify that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great question. Yes?
I heard recently that alcohol is becoming less of a problem and some other things are becoming more. Is that your experience?
I would say that's accurate with what we're seeing, yes. I don't know that I could really put a finger on why for you. All I always say is that the kids that are coming to us are using very heavy substances. And I will say nearly everybody uses marijuana. When I was younger, it was whoa, someone took their dad's beer, or that kid drinks, and now it's marijuana's everywhere. And I would think that trend is maybe just because you can do it very easily. It's not as noticeable, things like that, but yeah. And I will say when we first opened 4 years ago, maybe 1 in 10 kids was using fentanyl, and now I would say about 9 in 10 kids are. It's very scary.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
So if you have anything else,
I would encourage you to go to our website or grab some information that I have on the table over here. Talk about us in your communities, please. Let people know that we're around. And if anyone ever has a question, you're not maybe ready to refer a kid yet, give us a call and we can kind of talk you through how to talk to that kid about it too. We can do that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
To my knowledge, they will is this correct? They'll dismiss from from the main auditorium for the next session. Is that correct?
Pardon me?
To my understanding, they were going to dismiss from the main auditorium to session number 2. Is that correct, as you understand it? Okay, so you can take a look in your book to see what other sessions are available, and that next session will start at 3:15. So if you want to head down, take a break, go to the bathroom, then I think they should dismiss from there. That's how I understand it. Yep. Thank you all.